So there's this one drug that's all over the news, but for two totally opposite reasons. On one hand, people are calling it this revolutionary, fast-acting treatment for severe depression. But on the other hand, it's known as a really dangerous party drug that can cause some devastating long-term problems. It's a real puzzle. So what's the real story with ketamine?
Right. Healer or hazard? That's really the big question we're going to dig into today. Is this powerful substance a breakthrough medicine, a dangerous street drug, or is it way more complicated than that? All right, let's get into it.
And there you have it, right? The two completely different faces of ketamine. To doctors, it's this exciting new tool, a real breakthrough for people who've tried everything else for their depression. But on the street, totally different story, a whole different reputation. To really get what's going on, we've got to look at both sides of this coin. So let's start with the promise it holds in the clinic.
Okay, a new hope for depression. This is the story of ketamine as the healer. You know, for decades, psychiatrists have been looking for something, anything, that works faster and better for severe depression. And for a lot of them, ketamine suddenly looked like it could be the answer they've been searching for.
And it's had a pretty wild journey, actually. It was first developed way back in 1962, and by 1970, it was just a standard anesthetic in hospitals. Nobody really thought about it for mental health until the year 2000. And even then, it took almost another 20 years before a version of it, called esketamine, finally got the green light as an actual treatment for depression in the US and Europe. That's a long time.
So what's the big deal? Why all the excitement? It's the speed. It's all about how fast this stuff works. I mean, think about it. Most antidepressants can take weeks, even months, to kick in. But with ketamine, we're talking about major improvements in just a matter of hours. And this quote from the Royal College of Psychiatrists says it all. They're talking about rapid and robust improvement. That's why this is such a potential game changer, especially when someone is in a real crisis.
Okay, but that is only one side of the story. Now we have to flip the coin and look at the other, much darker side of ketamine, the peril of abuse. This is the warning from science about what happens with long-term, high-dose recreational use and what it actually does to your brain.
So, this is the big question, right? What happens when this powerful drug is taken not in a clinic, but over and over again, in huge doses, for years? Obviously, scientists can't just do that to people in a lab. It would be completely unethical. So, they did the next best thing. They found people who were already chronic recreational users and studied their brains to see what was going on.
And to do this, they were incredibly thorough. This is what's called a systematic review, basically a study of all the other studies. I mean, look at this. They started with over 11,000 different scientific records. And from there, they just whittled it down and down and down until they were left with only the absolute best, most relevant studies out there.
And what they ended up with was data from 16 really solid papers, looking at the brains of 440 chronic recreational users. By pulling all that data together, you get a way clearer picture of the long-term effects than you could from just one study alone. But before we dive into what they found, there's something we absolutely have to get straight.
And this is maybe the single most important point. The critical difference here is the dosage. We are not, I repeat, not comparing apples to apples here. A clinical dose is tiny, but the recreational doses they were seeing, they could be 25 to 70 times higher. That's not just a little more. That's a whole different universe. It's the difference between a single drop of rain and a fire hose.
Okay, so keeping that massive dosage difference in mind, let's take a look inside the brain. What did the science actually find was happening to these long-term high-dose users? All right, first up, let's talk about gray matter. The easiest way to think about it is like it's the brain's computer processors, you know? It's the parts that are doing all the heavy lifting, the processing, the controlling of movement, memory, emotions, all that good stuff. So what did they find? Well, across the board, the reviews showed that chronic users had less gray matter. The volume was actually lower, especially in the frontal cortex. That's the part of your brain that handles planning and making decisions. And the link was crystal clear. The longer they used and the more they used over their lifetime, the more that gray matter seemed to shrink.
Okay, so if the gray matter is all the little computers, what's the white matter? Well, that's all the wiring. It's the brain's communication network, kind of like the fiber optic cables that connect all those processors so they can talk to each other.
And the results here were just as stark. The studies found that chronic users had lower white matter integrity. What does that mean? It means those communication pathways, those cables, were basically damaged or frayed. And just like with the gray matter, this damage was directly linked to how much ketamine they had taken in their lifetime. And this was associated with real-world problems, like memory impairment.
Okay, here's where we are. We have this incredible, stark contrast. On one side, you have a promising medicine. On the other, a drug that seems to cause clear brain damage with heavy use. So, how do doctors, the medical experts, make sense of this? What are the doctor's orders?
Well, let's turn to a major authority on this, the UK's Royal College of Psychiatrists. They've issued specific recommendations, and it gives us a really good idea of what the professional consensus is right now. And the very first thing they point out is that the use of ketamine for depression is a novel treatment. Now, in doctor speak, novel is basically code for, hey, this is new, we don't have all the answers yet, and we need to be really, really careful. It's their way of saying, hold on, this is not some magic everyday cure. And from there, their path forward is super cautious. They point out that there are still huge gaps in what we know, things like long-term safety, the best dosage. We just don't have the data yet. And because of that, they have real concerns for patient safety. So what's their recommendation? For now, it should really only be used under strict research conditions.
And this really brings us to the bottom line. The verdict is pretty clear. You can't just take the findings of brain damage from years of high-dose recreational abuse and apply them to low, controlled clinical use. They're two different worlds. But what that research does do is serve as a massive warning sign. It shows us the potential for harm and completely validates why the medical world is saying, whoa, let's proceed with caution here.
When you step back, the story of ketamine feels like a glimpse into the future of medicine. We are developing these incredibly powerful tools that can offer real hope. But it leaves us with this huge, complicated question. How do we unlock the incredible promise of powerful medicines like this, while also protecting people from their very real peril? How do you draw that line when the healer and the hazard are literally the exact same molecule?